We'll be in 1 John 3 and verse 1. All right, so we're moving into a new section of John's writing in this letter. And one of the things we've talked about in the beginning is the peculiar way that he writes. It kind of defies categorization. Whereas Paul, when you read Paul, as difficult as he can be sometimes, you can trace it out. You can see that there's something in his brain he's working with. There's a grid that he's using, and you can kind of discern it. With John, I'm certain he has a grid he's working with. Discerning it, though, is a greater challenge because it's not the same way that Paul thinks and writes. The same way that we're all different in how we think and approach things. But I think probably the best approach, as we've been going through this and been studying in preparation for it, I think the approach that we mentioned in the beginning, that this spiral of teaching is probably the most accurate approach. That he starts out with a very tight message, and then with each time he comes back around and he recaps what he's talked about, and then he expands it a little bit further. And each time, it's like the loop just kind of gets wider and wider and wider, okay? And so, even though we've got it broken up into different sections, and chapter 3, verse 1 begins a different section talking about and contrasting the children of God with the children of the devil. Again, 3:1. This will be chapter 3, verse 1 through chapter 4, verse 6. He's rehashing things that he's already talked about. One of the points that has been strongly emphasized from the beginning is this disconnect between people who claim to follow Jesus, and yet at the same time they were not living in accordance with who Jesus is or what he taught. Okay? That is, what I do, how I live my life does not match, or it does not affect in any way my relationship with Jesus. And John is really striking at the heart of that, saying, no, part of being a Christian is transformation. It's becoming more and more like Jesus. It's not saying, okay, I'm a Christian, so all bets are off. It is, I am a Christian, and so I should continuously be becoming more and more like Jesus. And so there is this common thread of obedience that continually comes back around, and it's going to dominate even these first 10 verses of chapter 3. So let's look at this chapter under the idea of sonship or children, depending upon your translation and the particular word itself. So chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. It says, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. And everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure. Everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. You know that he appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him keeps on sinning. No one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous as he is righteous. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. No one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him, and he cannot keep on sinning because he has been born by God. By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother." All right, so what we've got is he affirms the status of sonship or being a child of God, and then he based upon that, in the first 3 verses, he then works through the characteristics of basically it's almost a genetic principle that children tend to take on the character of their parents. Even their physical traits and characteristics and mannerisms, their personalities, their understanding of things, children tend to take that on. And so by using this image of having been born of God, of being a child of God, then it permeates down then that his children would also reflect the nature of their father. Okay? And that's really what's driving this. In this section, it's about their obedience and really about their purity of life. But in the next section, which will begin in verse 11 forward, it's about the way that we love. Okay? And so those two, obedience and love, constantly keep coming and swirling back around in every section. So he begins by making this particular statement: see or behold what kind of love the Father has given to us. Okay? So it's an interjection itself. The word itself, when you look at it, when you're reading along the text itself, some translations will say behold. The word itself is, when you come across it, when you're reading it, especially in the original, it's like a stop in your tracks. Okay? It's meant to, it's like people are kind of casually going along and the writer is saying, pay attention. Stop for a minute. You need to get off of cruise control and think about something. Okay? And so what he is doing here when he says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, one writer pointed out, and I think correctly so, this word is very interesting because it literally means of what country? Of what country is this kind of love? Now the notion is he doesn't necessarily mean did it originate in this particular country like Rome or Spain or any other place. The notion is an expression that we might look at something and go, how in the world did that happen? Or what in the world happened? What he's talking about when he says, see the kind of love, is that this is otherworldly. What God is doing in making sinful humanity his children, there is no worldly explanation for it. Okay? That's why many times we'll mention, and it's often repeated, that one of the things about Christianity that make it so compelling, and many times as Americans we miss because we've grown up around it. We've been in, even if we didn't have anything to do with religion, we were still part of a culture that was influenced by Christian thought. Okay? And so the influences that are there, whether you admit it or not, they're still present. Okay? Whereas in other countries where Christianity is not the norm, it has not formed them, it becomes very obvious that the things that are mentioned, the things about Christianity that make it so different, when they read and they study and they learn about other religions and then they hear about Christianity and hear its message, there's something about it that's compelling to them. It is vastly different than other world religions. And part of that is the way that God actively loves his creation. Because the notion that existed then, and even still in many ways exists in great parts of the world, is that, you got different levels of it. One is that God, to quote the old Greek philosophers, an unmoved mover. There are people that still entertain the notion that God doesn't really care. That basically God kind of wound up the world and then let it loose and stepped back. He doesn't really care what happens. Or other religions and idolatries that have been going on for centuries, the notion is that you basically need to appease the gods. You need to get them off your back. And so when you offer sacrifices, you're doing it in hopes that He will bless you. Okay? Or that He will at least turn away from you long enough to allow you to prosper in a way. For an example, when we studied Kings, why was Baal such a big deal? Why was Baal such a big deal? He was a fertility god, but not fertility in the sense you and I think fertility. The fertility of the ground. And if you could appease him, then he would let you prosper. But you contrast that with what God had already said when He revealed Himself to the children of Israel in Deuteronomy, and He said what? If you will keep the law, if you will be faithful to me, I will bless you with the early and the latter rain. I will bless you when the seed goes in the ground, and just before it's time to be harvested, I'll bless it again. Not, you've got to do something, you've got to bring an offering to appease me to kind of help you out. I'm actively trying to help you. You see, the notion that God is not only interested in human beings, but intimately and lovingly interested in human beings is something that human beings, when they try and understand, when they try and think about God on their own, they cannot imagine a God who would actively seek their good. And John was living in a culture in Ephesus where all these notions existed of gods who had to be appeased. And people say, well, I thought in chapter 2 we talked about propitiation and God had to be appeased. His wrath had to be appeased. It did. But do you remember who appeased it? He did it Himself. He did it Himself. He literally punished Himself so He wouldn't punish us. You see, that's the very nature of forgiveness. The very nature of forgiveness is absorbing the blow within yourself, refusing to retaliate and to take it out on the person who has offended you. It's absorbing it in yourself and stopping that chain. And so when He says, do you see what kind of love? Where in the world did this come from? The kind of love that the Father has bestowed upon us, I think King James said. When I was in preaching school, we had to memorize in King James, and so a lot of my memory work is there. I use the ESV, but it oftentimes will come out as nowadays it will come out as a King James, New King James, ESV, crazy something. If it doesn't read exactly according to your translation, I'm not looking at it and reading it from mine. That's what's going on. So He's bestowed upon it, He's given it to us, that we should be called children of God. We should be called children of God. You know, there's this tendency to move past statements like this very quickly, and I know it because I'm guilty of it. Okay, in preparation for class, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, we got to keep a pace that is steady because you don't want to lose people more than already will be there. And so if I spent as much time talking about a text as was interesting to me, you'd shoot me, okay? Because there are nuances and different things. And that doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make me good. It just it. You have to, as a teacher, make sure your pace stays where your students are. And so you're trying to balance this in your head. You're also trying to balance, but you can't miss the overarching argument itself. You have to make sure it's connected in its unit so that people understand the unit. And so you're trying to balance a number of different things. And so your tendency is to look at a statement like this and say, how much time can I spend here? How much can I really dwell here? But sometimes you just have to stop for a while. The statement is too important to let pass. for yourself first, and then for other people. Here's one thing I know for certain when I read what Paul wrote in his letters. I know that Paul never got over the fact that God forgave him and adopted him. He never got over that. It continued to blow him away his entire life. His salvation did not make sense to him. How could God love me? Think about the statements that he makes. I am less than the least of all the saints, and I have been given the grace to preach. Ephesians 3. I am the least of all to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. I mean, just statement after statement. He continued to be blown away by that fact. And the fact that we call ourselves children of God is something that it's very easy, because it has become normal to us. And I don't think that's a bad thing that has become normal to us in that sense. We should feel secure in our standing before God. But at the same time, we need to also take times where we set aside and we kind of sit back and wonder at it too. And remind ourselves. So, when he starts this statement, see the love he's bestowed upon us, that we should be called children of God. Okay, not just called children of God. Why does he add this next statement? And so we are. It's like he's hammering home a point. It's not just that we're called. We are. People say it sounds too good to be true, but it is true. Yes. It's a good point for maybe those who couldn't hear. What we're also saying was it's like he's saying this is what you are called, but it's what you already are. Okay? So that is certainly the statement that he is driving on. I mean, that's a status change. He doesn't just the status change is the status change doesn't make any sense at many levels, emotionally speaking, because he doesn't just adopt us. It's not like he finds a cute little kitten somewhere and adopts it. He finds someone who has been fighting against him. And makes him his child. He said, this truth has to resonate. And so from this is the basic premise truth that he's going, everything that flows from this to chapter 4 and verse 6 is going to flow from this premise, that we're the children of God. And in particular, as it will develop here, children of God should mean that we try to become like him. And he goes on to say this, the reason why the world does not know us is because it didn't know him. The world acknowledged the idea of intimacy, agreement. At different levels, first of all, the world doesn't understand us in many ways. Doesn't understand why we would refrain from things, especially in this context of purity and obedience. And I think part of the reason why some people don't understand is because we haven't always done the best job of explaining why we're abstaining from certain things. Or been as gracious to people who don't hold the same conviction as we do about what we should abstain from. And so we try and take our purity and our abstinence of things and throw it in the face of other people. And what message does that communicate? It communicates me versus you. It communicates I'm better than you. That's why many people, and I understand that it is not necessarily a fair characterization. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. But one of the designations people give to Christians is that they're self-righteous people. Now again, some of it is fair, some of it is not. But part of that we have earned by taking our pure way of life and throwing it in the face of people and making it about, you should be like me, I'm better than you. Instead of simply saying, someone comes along and says, why don't you do this? Look, it's not because I think I'm better than everybody else if I don't do it or I do it. My relationship with God teaches me to abstain from certain things and to avoid certain things that could cause pain to Him. And I don't want to hurt Him. And furthermore, when I see Him, I'm captivated by His purity and His goodness, and I honestly just want to be like Him. So there is this, when he says the world doesn't know us, the world doesn't recognize us. The world doesn't understand why we're doing certain things, sometimes because we haven't communicated it well, but ultimately because you have to remember something. The worldview of Christianity and the worldview of secularism, they're two completely different ideas. Okay? They're completely different ideas. And, sometimes we can sit back and opine and say, can you believe what the world is coming to? Well, yes. Yes. It's a logical conclusion. It makes perfect sense. When you approach the world a certain way, the idea that certain things trickle down the stream of time and it becomes this, yes, that makes perfect sense. But we also have to be okay, because this is where, when we talk about worldliness and other different things, this is what we're dealing with. A lot of Christians are not okay with standing apart from and being separate from. They still want to participate in the things of the world. And by that I mean sinful worldly things, not talking about other things, sinful worldly things, and still be part of it. They want to fit in, but they don't want to stand out. They want to be like them, kind of, but not really. But it doesn't work that way. If I'm a Christian, I'm operating from a completely different set of ideas. And with this, and especially when you push this back into its context of what they were teaching and saying, you can see why the world does not know us because it didn't know Him. Listen, these teachers and what they're saying, they don't know you, they don't understand you because they've never known or understood Him. And so he continues on. We've got 2 or 3 minutes. It says, "Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him because we shall see Him as He is." So again, affirming, now we are God's children. What we shall be has not yet appeared. What God has in store for us. what will happen at the end of time, what will happen at the resurrection, how will we be changed, what will we look like, what will the experience be. Listen, there are a lot of people who pontificate on that, but the truth of the matter is nobody knows. It's exactly what John said. It does not yet appear what we shall be. What we do know is that when he appears, we will be like him. Some form of resurrection existence will be like him. And then he says, because we shall see him as he is. Now that statement, that statement embodies so much of Christian faith, of seeing God, of finally being able to see the God you've never been able to see. And there's something, and that's why he says in verse 3, and everyone who thus hopes in him purifies himself as he is pure. Why do you purify yourself? Well, because God is pure. Well, what's the deal about that? Well, so I was thinking about this a little bit ago, and then we'll be done. I was thinking about the effect that a newborn child can have on people. Think about this for a minute. The second you hold a newborn child, everything is different. When you're the parent, everything is different. When you're the grandparent, everything is... Isn't it amazing how a room full of sophisticated, highly educated people, or the most common people you could imagine, serious, gruff-faced, you get them in that delivery room, you let them see that child the first time, and it's like, who in the world are you? Because there's something about the purity and the beauty of that child that is just captivating. It stops you, it forms you, it changes you. Okay, now imagine looking at God who is pure beauty, who is pure holiness, who is pure goodness in every sense of it. And when you sit there, all you can do is stare at him. That's what he's saying here. When I see him, we'll be like him because we'll see him as he is, and everybody who has this hope purifies himself as he is pure. How many times have you not looked at a child and go, I wish I could be more like him? That's the point. When you look at God, you're captivated and say, I want to be more like him. That's it. So we will pause there and, well, not next week because next week will be VBS, but the next week after that we will pick up around this region.